This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. In today's podcast episode, I chat with Jim Afremow and Phil White, who've written an excellent book to be released in December called The Leader's Mind. I tap into their expertise to help you, the listener, where we discuss different examples from the book that link to mental toughness. For example, Tammie Jo Shults and the story around how she took control of a stricken plane when there was an engine failure, and how she went on to manage the situation and herself. We discuss Nick Gill, the All Blacks strength and conditioning coach, and the All Blacks' dedication to continued excellence. Lastly, we go on to talk about Donald Robertson, an advocate of using Stoicism to achieve your goals. Enjoy. So, Jim, could you tell the listeners about your background in sports psychology and where that interest began?
You bet, David. So, I have a doctorate in sports psychology, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor. And growing up, I played a lot of different sports. What do you say? A jack of all trades, but a master of none. And I would run into little mental walls and mental hurdles like most performers. And I would ask a lot of questions, whether, my dad or coaches or teammates about, how do you relax before the big game, or is that even important to relax before the big game? How do you handle your nerves? How do you overcome slumps? How do you feel more confident when you perform? How do you stay focused? And I wasn't able to find a lot of good answers to these questions. And so that led me down the rabbit hole of sports psychology. And, about 25 years ago, there wasn't too much on sports psychology out there for the general public. And so that just really piqued my interest. At University of Oregon, I studied psychology, and then I went to grad school at Michigan State, and really just fell in love with the topic, and earned my PhD there, and started realizing that in terms of mental health, how important that is as well for any performer. And so then that's why I decided to earn a master's degree in counseling. And so with the work that I've been fortunate enough to do with athletes and teams and other types of performers in other achievement domains, really working with the whole person to help them be the best version of themselves, or as Phil and I like to talk about, in terms of being a gold medalist, in terms of having a gold medal life, or thinking like a champion in your sport to get the best out of what you do have.
So do you find most of your work is more performance related, or is there a nice balance between mental health and performance?
Well, I think that's what's exciting about the field of sports psychology and mental health, is that, circumstances are always changing. So someone might be, presenting with more of a performance related concern, in terms of, hey, how do I focus when I get distracted, or how do I refocus when it counts the most? And so that might be a topic of discussion, but then at a later time, life happens, and maybe there's an illness in the family, or, there's a different situation in terms of, relational issues, things like that, financial challenges. And so we focus more on off the field issues. So usually it's a nice combination of both.
Yeah. Similarly, I find that that's pretty much the same. And as you say, things are evolving and changing, and there seems to be certainly more awareness of mental health, definitely in the UK here. I'm guessing it's the same over there.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, it's gotten a lot worse with COVID. And Phil and I have done a lot of research in terms of interviews and looking in terms of actual studies on mental health issues in the athlete population. And it's just unfortunate, in terms of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, those kind of things. And so, as Phil and I like to talk about, there's no health without mental health. And there's obviously not going to be peak performance unless things are, pretty okay in terms of the personal side of life. So, So it's kind of like two hands. You need you need to use both, in terms of mental health and peak performance strategies.
Yeah, hugely. And Phil, do you want to share with the listeners your background and your interest in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a writer by trade and was a two-sport college athlete. And so I would say it's fair to say I'm obsessed with human performance and, what are the lessons that we can take from the elite end of sport, of military performance, business performance, that we can kind of take from that, say, Formula One test track and spin it back to street cars like ourselves. And so, got connected with Jim through an article for Trade Heroic that I did on as part of a series on youth sports. And as anyone who's a parent knows, there are some pretty crazy youth sports parents out there. And so, really just wanted to ask Jim, to clear up a couple of myths. Is it ever too young for kids to start learning mental skills, learning the mental game? And I think the answer he would still say is no. And with that in mind, then where should they start? I have two boys myself, and now a high schooler among them somehow, which makes me feel ancient. And selfishly, these are things that I could apply to my own family as well. And then Jim and I teamed up for the Champion's Mind app, and then decided, well, we're working really well together, so we both write books. So why not write books together? So hence the Leader's Mind, and why we're talking with you today.
Excellent. Actually, on that topic there, you mentioned there about starting young and when you actually start. So, what would your advice be there, Jim, to the parent who potentially is considering, sports psychology for their child if they're 8, 9, 10 years old? Is that too young or not?
Well, I think we could go a lot younger, and I could give you a personal example. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she was having a temper tantrum around, a year and a half old. And my wife said, hey, teach her one of those breathing techniques that you teach your athletes. And it just never dawned on me that, I've worked with very young gymnasts before, but it never dawned on me in that moment to actually use some of those strategies and techniques with my own daughter. And so I said, sure, why not? And we both laid on the floor and I did some belly breathing, and she started kind of mimicking what I was doing. And then as she was breathing, she all of a sudden started laughing and feeling better. And so I think a lot of these skills and strategies that we teach in sports psychology should be started as young as possible, in terms of no pressure necessarily, in terms of getting them perfectly right. But, breathing techniques, visualization, body language, positive self-talk, those can be started and should be started at such a young age. And they're such foundational topics for life. And so, I kind of wish that these were taught earlier, for our generation. And that's one of the things that Phil and I are so excited about in terms of the Champion's Mind app is helping to make sports psychology for everyone. And something that we should all be using to get the most out of our day instead of just kind of winging it and hoping things work out.
Yeah, which let's face it, most people do, don't they? They're very comfortable with the way things go, and yeah, as you say, they just let things happen as opposed to taking control.
And that's absolutely true. I mean, that's what we like to talk about in terms of having a champion's mind is you need to be proactive with your life. What do I really, really want? And how bad do I want it? And then what do I need to do physically to be at my best, but then also mentally to be at my best? And one of the misconceptions I think we'd all agree in terms of sports psychology is that you're either born with confidence or you're not, or you're either good at composure or you're just someone that loses their temper a lot. And as we know, mental skills can all be learned and developed similar to physical skills. So that's what's exciting, is that we have much more control over ourselves and our performance than we could ever probably even imagine.
Without a shadow of doubt. And one thing I'm just going to pick you up on a little bit earlier, you mentioned about the importance of relaxing, or you mentioned maybe not relaxing before a big game. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I appreciate you circling back to that. One of the things that, back in my day, late 80s, early 90s, when I was, playing most competitive sports or on teams and such, I think the general advice was, hey, just relax before the big game, or, just take a deep breath, as if that's all you needed to hear. Whereas now when someone tells me they're nervous before they perform, or, they have a lot of butterflies in the belly, so to speak, before they perform, I think it's great. That's just energy. That's power. And so how can we tap into that? How can we channel that energy so that you can perform even better? It's been said before that pressure can improve a performance by 15% or, hinder a performance by 15%. And so that's what we do, I think, with that energy, with those butterflies. And as we talk about in sports psychology, it's all about trying to get those butterflies to fly in formation. And so welcoming the pressure, welcoming the stress, inviting challenges, rather than just trying to relax and get rid of all that. No one could perform their best with a resting heart rate.
So in effect, what you're saying is you're trying to shift the perspective around these butterflies and those sort of feelings that you get in your body, so that they're used, as you're saying, in a positive sense.
I think so. I think it's important to realize that the body is designed to perform better under stress. And so a lot of the physiological and psychological changes that occur before we perform are helpful. But most of us don't realize that because they're uncomfortable, or, we're just not used to having those feelings and those sensations. And so we start fighting ourselves and rather than helping ourselves in those moments.
This leads us quite nicely on to a chapter in the book that you've written, and which is going to be published soon. And the pilot Tammie Jo Shults, and actually what she experienced and how she actually went on to control her emotions. Do you just want to share a little bit more about that story?
Yeah. The title is Grace Under Pressure, and of the chapter, and Phil was able to land us this interview with Tammie Jo Shults, and her husband was involved in the discussion. And what just an amazing person and an amazing pilot. And so, Phil, what are some of your kind of thoughts about how she was able to demonstrate grace under pressure?
Yeah, I think really she defaulted to her training. So she was the first in the military to fly a certain class of fighter jets, and had a mentor by the name of Rosemary Mariner, who was a real pioneer in that kind of Top Gun arena, and really a trailblazer as a naval pilot. And she would, continue to be a resource for Tammie Jo all the way through when she passed away about a year and a half ago. And so luckily somebody had blazed the trail before her, quite literally. But, they were both in their own right real pioneers in terms of being naval aviators and being able to do all the stuff that, again, somebody might see in the movie Top Gun, but in real life. And so just through those, thousands of reps in combat training, I think it developed a steeliness in Tammie Jo, and it developed an ability to default to her baseline, which was, millions of dollars worth of training. And then the same with a commercial airliner. And so really she went into a place. So what happened with this Southwest Airlines flight is this is the one where one of the engines blew up, one of the four engines, and partially sucked a woman out, and that woman ended up passing away. The cabin partially depressurized, and now you've got this stricken plane that you've got to somehow be able to put on the ground with no further loss of life. So this is somewhat similar to the movie Sully with Tom Hanks, but Tammie Jo, while she deserves it, hasn't had a Tom Hanks style movie yet, even though I believe there might be a TV show in the works about it. So basically, she defaulted to her training one, and then she was also able to delegate responsibilities both to her co-pilot in terms of what was going on in the cabin, and also trusted the cabin crew to do their job. And she said that the way that they greeted the passengers that day and were helpful, disabled folks with small kids, gave her the utmost confidence that they would take care of those passengers to the last moment in any scenario. And so she had the utmost faith in them in that situation. And unlike some pilots, maybe Tammie Jo's very serious about always bringing coffee or chocolates or something for the crew to break the ice, particularly if it's a crew that she's flying with for the first time. She asked them up front, hey, is there anything you notice in the cabin today that might be a problem later? Maybe it's this bloody coffee pot, you put it down and it just keeps rattling around. Well, that might not be a problem on the ground at 36,000 feet. It could be a problem. So to try to kind of get into those scenarios up front and remove small problems before they become big problems, give everyone a chance to speak and say what they might have to say. And then also just getting down and gritty. And she notices there's a piece of trash on the floor. She'll go pick it up, put it in the trash. And that kind of humbles people. It makes them realize, well, if the pilot's willing to do this, the one in control of this bird, then I should probably be willing to tidy up the cabin a bit better too. And so I think three things. One, her servant leadership. Two, her absolute trust in her co-pilot and her crew. And three, just defaulting to these thousands of hours of training and being able to almost go into, if you'll pardon the bad dad joke, autopilot.
Yeah, and that ability to go into autopilot, like you say, from the thousands of hours that she's put in, it's amazing to be able to stay in such control and be so composed in such a pressurized situation.
Yeah. And I would add to that as well. As we know, communication is a huge part of leadership. And one of the things that Phil and I really picked up in our interview with Tammie Jo Shults is that, like she said, you don't trust people you don't know. So she made that extra effort to get to know the people that she worked with, wherever they were in the chain of command. And I think that's really important because, as she said, as a leader or as a captain in her case, you're not going to know everything that's going on. You need the information from others, and they need to be comfortable coming to you, and you need to, feel comfortable going to them. And so that's what we really picked up on, is that, she was just great at, and she is great at inspiring people to do things rather than just instructing them to do things. And part of that is because she got to know them as people, not just as performers or productivity machines, as sometimes we tend to feel in big corporations.
Yeah. And sometimes I suppose in corporations, in sport, wherever it is, people don't tend to take the time out, do they? Just to get to know the individual. That just so focused on their job and the doing element to it.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. I've had a lot of experiences working with professional teams, and it's amazing sometimes taking, kind of in my own role, taking out coaches and others to dinner, and I would ask questions. What was tell me a hero of yours growing up, or what's a hardship you overcame. And as the person's talking, someone, maybe a fellow coach that's worked 10 years with this person would look over and say, I never knew that about you. And so just taking that extra time to get to know people makes the work a much more rewarding, but makes for a much more cohesive unit. And so it's great for leadership and teamwork and culture building.
So when you spoke to Nick Gill, who is a strength and conditioning coach with the All Blacks, did you touch on some of those topics as well? Do you want to share with the listeners some of the things that you found out?
Yeah, Phil actually titled this chapter "The Man in Black," and it's a perfect title for the chapter. And one of the quotes from Nick in the chapter is, "Keep trying to do everything a little bit better. That's the key to continual improvement and success." And part of that is being a good person, and while you're doing your best. And he's someone that the players are comfortable with because, he's been there for a long time, and because he gets to know them, what makes them tick, what helps, what doesn't help, what their goals are. And so, it's a true culture of, everyone having a shared goal, and everyone playing an important role in accomplishing that goal. And so what was really cool about Nick for me is just how confident he is, but also how humble. He's one of those leaders that and peak performers, basically, that never feels like he's arrived. He could always learn more. He could always do better. And I think that's part of the culture with the All Blacks. And Phil's known Nick for quite some time. What would you say, Phil, in terms of what Nick brings to the table for the All Blacks?
Yeah, I think just I recently read an interview that Tim Ferriss did with James Dyson, that great British genius, and he said, never be satisfied. Always be unhappy with your product and with other people's products, right? That's what drives continual improvement. And Nick's the same way. The All Blacks are not content to win a narrow game. So there was one World Cup final against France that was probably the lowest scoring game the All Blacks have had for 20, 30 years. I think the final score was, 9-8 or something like that. They hate that kind of game, and not because it's stressful, but they want to, like Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson on the 92 Dream Team. Winning isn't enough. Domination is the goal. And so, the Bledisloe recently, I think they were up 18-0 on Australia at halftime, something like that, continue to pour it on. And people might look at that as, oh, the All Blacks are showboating or they're running up the score. But this is the team that has the winningest percentage in team sports history. And they know that there's a target on their back every day. And so Nick talks about this. If they have you on the ground with their foot on you, they're not going to let their foot off, because if they give you that inch of daylight, and there shouldn't even be the possibility that you're not going to bring your best game against the All Blacks, because you are. But so they're going to try to take that air from you right away, just knock that right out of you and never let you get your composure, and just keep pouring it on, pouring it on, pouring it on.
Yeah, there's certainly something about champions in that respect, isn't there? Where they just, like you say, they just don't take their foot off the gas. And when Tiger Woods was in his prime, he was a classic example of that as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think it's great with champions in terms of always trying to do their best to be at their best, and welcoming challenges, in terms of, we want other people to bring their best as well, because that will make us even better. And so, in terms of never satisfied, I think that, I heard once someone say that, it's kind of like being a farmer. You can't ever get too happy on a farm, because there's always work to do. There's always things to do. You can't be complacent on a farm. And that's similar in any great culture. You can celebrate your successes and what you want to see happen more often. But that each day starts at zero again, and you got to earn everything.
Yeah, so in some ways, they're very good at taking the emotion out of it, aren't they? That, yes, like you say, they'll celebrate their successes. They're going to be really happy about it, but then they're quick to move on. And likewise, the defeats, they'll reflect and learn from their mistakes, not get too down, and again kick on.
Yeah, and maybe not get too down, but sometimes even get more driven. Hey, we figured out what didn't work, or like you said, what did we learn? What will help us better? To be better. But also, a lot of times, most of us forget that when we suffer some of our biggest disappointments or setbacks, that opens us up to sometimes major breakthroughs in our performance. And so, winning makes you happy, and I think sometimes losing makes you wise.
Yeah, very, very much so. And where does Stoicism come into this? You've chatted to Donald Robertson, and again, it's about achieving goals and excellence, I believe, in this chapter. So do you want to just talk a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, well, most of the leaders that we talk about in the book and write about in the book are more contemporary. But Phil and I got a big kick out of just the life example of Marcus Aurelius. And, we've all heard the expression, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that wasn't the case for Marcus Aurelius. So imagine that the most powerful man on earth used his power for the greater good. And so I think he's a great role model for all of us, Marcus Aurelius, in terms of Stoicism. He leaned on Stoicism to be his best self and to be a good leader. And that's really about living in agreement or in harmony with the world. And having a positive view of humans as rational people or capable of being rational. And I think what's really cool about Marcus Aurelius is, in terms of his book, The Meditations, he was writing to himself and trying to be the best that he could be. And he would show a lot of grace to other people. So he would say, hey, remember, you're not perfect either. And remember, you still have a lot to learn too. Or, hey, you lost your cool as well. So give this person, a little bit of, benefit of the doubt that maybe they're just having a bad day. And so, just what a great worldview in terms of, trying to make things better for everyone. And the Stoics were the original cosmopolitans, and they were, like citizens of the cosmos, and they really wanted everything to be a true win-win. And so when they would defeat their enemy, they wouldn't necessarily celebrate the enemy's demise, but they would want to bring them up and pull them up and kind of make it, again, like more of a win-win than us versus you. So Donald Robertson is a colleague of mine. He's a licensed clinician and a noted Stoic expert. And so Phil and I had a great interview with him, and he just shared a lot of little tidbits and gems and little stories of Marcus Aurelius. Just in terms of, again, the richest man on earth, and he wear kind of common clothes. He didn't feel that he needed to appear better or greater or have more than anyone else. And so, but just a lot of fun stories from him, and then how to apply some of that Stoic philosophy to leadership, but also just stress management. As we all know, being a leader isn't easy, and it's ever changing, and how important it is. Phil and I recently talked about just that, we've all heard that most people leave their jobs not because of the nature of the work, but because of the relationship with their boss. And so leadership is something that we all need to get better at. We should all think of ourselves as leaders, whether in our community or, in our place of work, in our families and so forth. And I think it's just fun to use Marcus Aurelius as a bit of an example for that.
Yet, when you mentioned there about people potentially like leaving their work because of their boss, often it just boils down to, again, what you were saying before there about just communication, isn't it? And actually, again, spending the time to get to know each other a little bit, and then the relationships develop from that point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that a common thread through all the interviews for the Leader's Mind book is that the people that we interviewed are good people, and they really think about themselves, but in context with others. And so I think they do a really good job of bringing out the best in themselves and understanding that, hey, I'm a example of what I want people that I'm working with to be like. So, the buck stops here. I need to take responsibility for my own behavior, serve as a good example, and then find ways to help bring out the best in people. One of the people that we interviewed for the book is Nick Peters, and he's a fire district manager, so works, on forest fires. And unfortunately, that's something that's always in the news. But he's one of those guys out there battling the fires. And he said, hey, a lot of leadership can be boiled down to, hey, just be a good person. So he talks in there about Stoicism has been really helpful to him in terms of being his best self. One of the things that we talk about in sports psychology a lot is controlling the controllables. And that's really actually a Stoic philosophy. And so he really tries to use that in his own work and for his own stress management.
Right. So as we begin to wrap this one up, the listeners, the vast majority of the listeners, most of them are athletes or coaches, and then we have different business professionals who have an interest in the field. Most people, certainly from messages I get, do have this idea that they want to be the best that they can possibly be in their chosen area. So we'll start with you, Phil. What one key takeaway from the conversation that we've had would you give to the listeners?
Yeah, I think that you can't leave your mental game to chance and circumstance. I think that, as Jim often says, these are mental skills; they're not magic skills. And I think that he often jokes that he's the last person that an athlete or a coach or a parent or a team will come to. They won't wait, and they like to wait until the wheels are really falling off before considering the mental game. But I think that whether it's with an app like the Champion's Mind, we found that 3, 4, or 5 minutes a day, every day, is like compound interest for your mental game. And it's something that we can all develop. And in terms of a competitive edge, at a certain point, everyone is big, strong, and fast to a certain degree, what we would call in sport functional minimums. Everyone has access to good facilities and to good coaching. So what is it that's going to separate you? And I think that the less you know about mental skills training, actually, the better, because that means that there's 100% of potential there that you can tap into. And so maybe it's something that you've struggled with, like your confidence or your mental toughness, and you start there. Maybe it's something that you're more interested in, kind of that mind-body connection. So as Jim alluded to earlier, how can your breath give you a way to check in on your state and then to alter your state in just a couple of minutes? Maybe it's something like, for me, I've always struggled with visualization, was never able to get it down very well as an athlete. So maybe you start there, and then you'll start to realize that there's this whole world of untapped performance. And not everyone was born with Usain Bolt's fast twitch muscle fiber profile or stride length. Not everyone can serve like Serena Williams, but you can learn to think like these people, like these high performers. And doing so, it may not seem like a lot, but again, 3, 4, 5 minutes a day, just start paying into that account daily. Make it either, maybe it's something that you struggle, like Jim and I struggle to get up in the morning and get going. Okay, well, maybe you start your day with some goal setting. How am I going to be a champion today? And then at night, how was I a champion today? And how am I going to be a champion tomorrow? Maybe in the evening, you spend a few minutes on breath work, particularly if you're someone like me that's pretty hard driving and struggles to come down at night. So maybe that's where it is. And just like your workouts, find the time of day that you either have the greatest need or the greatest opportunity or both, commit to it, and start a mental skills training practice, and you'll be amazed where it takes you.
No, I couldn't agree more. Let's face it, if you can lift 10 kilos and you want to try and lift 100 kilos, then yeah, you've got to do that 5 minutes or 30 minutes a day, whatever it is, and you'll do it. And yeah, it's exactly the same with when it comes to mindset. And as you say, there's just so many facets to mental toughness and trying to develop that mindset. So yeah, Jim, what about yourself? What would your key takeaway be?
I think a key takeaway along the lines of kind of what Phil said is our mental framework is really everything. Perception is 9/10 reality. And what I mean by that is most of us tend to look at life as a series of threats that we hope to avoid, or things that we probably should do, but what we don't want to do. And that's what we call settling for silver. And so it's really about thinking gold, living a gold medal life, daily acts of excellence, and to help us reach those goals. But really trying to really explore what's possible for ourselves. And so I think that's a good question: is what's possible? If something doesn't happen well, okay, what's possible now? If something does happen well, man, what's even possible that maybe I thought was impossible that I could accomplish now. But daily acts of excellence, we tend to be, most of us tend to be procrastinators, and we all have a negativity bias, in terms of always kind of looking at the bad side of things for more survival rather than success. And so really fighting that through mental skills training, thinking like a champion, being more optimistic, better body language, visualizing our success and the steps that it takes to achieve that success. And really just enjoying challenges and seeking them out, inviting them, and using them as an opportunity to show what we're made of, and really rise to the occasion in those circumstances rather than caving in and saying, oh, this is too hard or this isn't fair.
Wow. Well, 2 takeaways. I think we've got about 10 takeaways there for the listeners. Some fantastic insights and great tips. Whereabouts can the listeners find you? Find you both should they want to reach out to you and ask any questions?
Yeah, well, Phil and I are all over the internet. I think I follow half of Twitter on my Twitter page. It's at Gold Medal Mind. And then my personal website is goldmedalmind.net. How about you, Phil?
Yeah, I'm not on the socials a whole lot, but on Instagram at Phil White Books, and the same on Twitter, I guess, as well, even though probably not on there as much as I should be. And then also just philwhitebooks.com. And then people can also look out for our upcoming podcast, which is called Champion Conversations Podcast. So that website isn't live yet, but it sure will be soon. Excellent.
All of those details will go in the show notes, and the listeners can reach out to you quite easily if that is the case. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, thanks very much for your time, both Jim and Phil.
Thanks, David, and thanks to your listeners. What a great podcast, and we appreciate the great questions that you asked today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that was a fun episode to record. There were many timely reminders. I especially liked the discussion around the stricken plane and the pilot's response. The power of controlling your state was very clear from that conversation. If Tammie Jo Shults had not been able to do so, there certainly could have been some catastrophic problems. And what Jim and Phil also highlight, that this is a skill. It's a skill that can be learned. Tammie certainly did through her training. So I'd ask you, the listener, if you are able to control your emotions better when you're feeling the heat or when you're under pressure, be that on a football pitch, a golf course, when you're coaching, or when you're with your kids or in the workplace, what would that give to you? What difference would that make to your life and the lives of your work colleagues, of your teammates, kids, partners, and athletes? I'd say a lot. You may well go on to communicate an awful lot better if you are that coach or parent. And if you're the athlete, you might well be able to actually play better when you're under the cosh in those important points in matches and tournaments. Now, you'll find an awful lot of content on our website. I've written a number of blogs around this topic, coming from a variety of different angles. So feel free to scroll through our archives. There's lots of practical tips there that you can apply from them. In the show notes, you'll find there's some links to some of these articles, as well as some specific podcasts that we've recorded previously on this area. So till next time, enjoy yourself and feel free to have a read and go back to some of our old podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.